Hello guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a terrain base for your WW1 or WW2 dioramas. I've made this base specifically for a project which I've got coming up in the next few weeks, but it also works as a general base for photographing models, as you can see in these photos. I typically start my dioramas with some XPS foam. This comes in a variety of colours: black, purple, pink colours, blue, but it's all the same stuff really. You can get this online at a variety of places. It's best to search for XPS foam or for floor insulation. Because it's quite thin, typically either 6 or 10mm sheets, I tend to put 2 of these together. PVA glue will do that for you, but you need to make sure you put some weight on top to hold it in place while the glue dries overnight. I've skipped ahead a step here and I've stuck some wood around the frame of the foam. You can get this kind of wood in all sorts of places, including model stores. It's very thin and easy to cut, and you'll notice that I've left it slightly higher than the XPS foam. Next up, I want to make the general shape of the terrain. This is just going to be the undulations, and to do that I'm going to use this DAS air drying clay. You can get this in a variety of colours, but that's largely irrelevant because this is only going to make up the general shape of the terrain. It's not going to make up the actual texture. So for example, if I was making a desert diorama, I could use this clay to make the sand dunes and then put a sand texture on top. If I was making a muddy field diorama, I could use this to make the general shape of the muddy field and then put a muddy soil texture on top. In fact, to be honest, I could even use this to make an ocean diorama to get the general shape of the waves, and then paint it and put some gloss on top to give it a water effect. You'll notice here I'm just pushing it in with my fingers. I'm using gloves to avoid getting any fingerprints in the terrain, and I'm making sure the clay goes over the top of the wooden frame, as I feel that gives a better effect than having the wood sticking out. Once that's done, and while the clay is still workable, I'm just sculpting some general shapes in here. So in my case, I've got a road that's going not quite parallel to the long edge, so I'm using my finger to mark some ruts and so on going in that direction. I don't have a grassy bank or anything like that at the side of my terrain, but of course you could easily provide one if you wanted. When I'm happy with that general shape, I'm now going to put in some tyre marks. Here I've got a spare rubber tyre from some military kit that I made a while ago. Of course I'm making sure it's 1/35 scale because that's what my diorama is for, and I'm running that backwards and forwards along the road. You can also do this with spare tank tracks or with those rubber band tracks if you've got some of those. At one point here I use a double wheel because of course some trucks etc. have 2 lots of wheels, until you're happy with the effect. With anything like this clay, I tend to leave it overnight to dry, even though it's probably drier sooner. Then I wanted a broken wall in the corner of my diorama, so I used these latex brick moulds. These are from Diorama Debris. You can use a variety of materials to mould them. I simply used hydrocal, which is like a lightweight plaster of Paris. To stick the wall to the base, I'm using this modelling paste. But equally you could use some more clay, you could use some glue, you could use some of the acrylic texture which I'm going to apply in the next step. This wall is supposed to be the remains of a damaged house, so I'm going to add some broken floorboards inside. These are simply some coffee stirrers which are cut to length. Originally I intended the modelling paste to hold those to the base, but it had different ideas, so I used some super glue instead. Now here is what gives me my texture for the ground. It's AK Terrain's Dry Ground. This is an acrylic paste, and if you watched my channel before you'll know that I use this stuff a lot. And I use it for a lot more than dry ground as well. I used it recently on my desert diorama. There's all kinds of things you can use it on. You can also mix things like stones and sand into it as well to change the consistency slightly. This is where the advantage of the clay shows, because now I only need a really thin layer of this acrylic paste. You can imagine if I was trying to build up those ruts in this acrylic paste, I would really need quite a significant amount here. So I'm simply stippling the paste on to get good coverage. I'll worry about the direction a bit later. At the moment I'm just making sure there's nothing showing through from the clay. There we go, we have full coverage there. You can see I've put a few broken bricks next to the wall as well. And now I can start to make sure that the paste goes in roughly the right direction with those wheel ruts. So I can put a bit of extra paste on as well, and that will give me sort of raised muddy ruts. I suppose at this point I should mention composition. So you'll notice that my road goes not quite parallel to the long edge of the base. In general, it's a good idea to avoid having anything that is parallel or perpendicular to the base edges. It just doesn't quite look right. A slight angle gives a better impression that the scene continues outside of your terrain base. As you can see, I've sprinkled a few more broken bricks here and there. Because I'm putting these on now rather than when I put the clay down, which is a perfectly good option to do as well, I need to make sure these bricks are properly pressed into the paste so that they don't look like they're floating on top. Now, rather annoyingly, because this is supposed to be a tutorial, I seem to have lost some footage. But what I've done here is I've let the acrylic paste dry, and then I've gone over the entire base, including the wall and the floorboards, with XF69 NATO black. Then I've gone over the entire terrain with XF52 flat earth. Then I've used a bit of buff, which is XF57, to lighten that flat earth, and I've gone over the terrain in some areas in the direction of travel along those ruts to lighten certain areas. And I've given a mix of XF69 and XF9, which is NATO black and hull red, to the brick wall. One nice side effect of me airbrushing the wall and then airbrushing the terrain is that I've got overspray from the terrain onto the wall, and that has the start of sort of basic weathering effect. It looks like dirt's being kicked up, dust has been kicked up from the road onto that wall, which is quite nice. So sorry guys, that was quite a big step there, but yes, that's what I did there. And then once that was done, I used some Vallejo model colour to pick out the individual bricks, both on the wall and on the road. Typically what I do here is squeeze these paints out onto a palette, let them run into each other a little bit so that every brick has a slightly different shade. You can also vary the amount of thinner, which in this case for Vallejo model colour is just water, and that gives you slightly different shades as well. A couple of tricks: when you're painting the bricks on the road, you need to make sure that you get the sides as well. That's particularly important because it's hard to go back and do the sides when you're using so many different shades. And on the wall, if you're painting any bricks at the end, make sure you get the ends. You can see in that shot there too that I've given the floorboards on the inside a coat of XF57 buff. Only very lightly, so a lot of that NATO black undercoat is still showing through. Now you'll notice earlier that I didn't put any stones into the terrain paste, and if you want to, that's a perfectly good option too. I do that quite often. However, there are just naturally some bigger sort of blobs of the terrain paste. So now I'm picking those out with some stone colours, some greys and some yellows, as if they were stones. And again, just like the brickwork, the more you vary the colours within a range, the better they will look. You can see there in the background that the variation on the terrain is already good. Even though it was simply NATO black, then some XF52 flat earth, and then some lightened flat earth, a combination of all three and the change in opacity has given some really good variation of colour there. Next up, I took some oil paint from Abteilung 502, thinned it with odourless thinners, and applied it to a few areas, in particular the bricks, so that should pull out some of the details of the bricks. And it also helped with the wood grain effect on the floorboards. I did try applying this to the brick wall as well, but to be honest it didn't have much effect, it didn't really make much difference. Next up I wanted some grass. Now I could use static grass for this, but I bought these 10mm scenic tufts a while ago, and to be honest I haven't really used them. And I'm trying to sort of clear out a lot of those older products that I bought and might not have used too much. They're self-adhesive, so I cut them away with the backing paper for now, and I gave them a paint before anything else. The reason I painted them before adding them is simply because I wouldn't be able to get around the back side of them if they were against the brick wall. And in general, painting these things I think gives a better result. I started out with some of the XF52 flat earth. I lightened it a little bit with buff. As you can see, they look very dry and dead. So once I'd superglued them to the base, I went back with a green paint and effectively sort of dry brushed them to catch some of the strands and bring them a bit more to life. Next up was some mud effects, and I decided on this loose ground and this earth effect, both from Ammo by MIG. And I need to remember these because of course it would be ideal if when I put my vehicle into the terrain I can use the same weathering effects on that. I have seen these weathering effects put to very good use in some people's videos. I'm not convinced that I really did that here in this video and that they made that much difference overall. However, I did apply them around some of the features such as the grass and the broken bricks and some of the lower ruts in the road. Because they're enamel, you have lots of working time. So while the first colour was drying, I could add the second and that would let them blend in nicely. You'll notice also, because I haven't varnished the base yet, that this enamel, and the thinner in particular, really gets absorbed into the terrain. But those tide marks from that thinner will disappear as it dries. My final step was to take a light brown paint and dry brush it over the raised detail. Hopefully that should highlight some of those details and also give again a variation in tone. And with that done, the terrain is finished, so let's see how it looks with some vehicles. And there we go guys, that was my tutorial for building this terrain base for World War I or World War II dioramas. I hope you found this video useful. Of course there are a few things that I could do to enhance this further. For example, I could use some brick dust pigment on the broken wall to give it a bit of a dusty, damaged look. I could put some streaking effects on the wall with grime and dirt and rain running down it. And I could put some sort of green oil paint or similar like moss effects on the bottom of the wall as well. What I will do is leave it as it is for now, and before I use it with my intended model, I'll go back and think about how I feel about those extra effects. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I had great fun building this terrain, and as I said, it's intended for a project which I'm currently working on and should be available in a couple of weeks for a video. You probably got a couple of hints for that during this video. It won't be my next video, however, but I do think that you will like that one, and that one will be out on Friday. My Patreon supporters and YouTube members already know what that video will be, and they've seen lots of other examples of my work in progress as I post pictures onto those pages on a regular basis. So I'd like to thank those guys for their support, and if you would like to join either YouTube membership or Patreon, there are links in the description below. Either way, I'd like to say thank you to all of you for watching, it's much appreciated. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and until Friday, have fun modelling.